Tomorrow marks Iowa State's postseason entry for the 2024 college football season, with a chance to make some school history on the line. First off, Matt Campbell has yet to earn a win in Camping World Stadium, although he's gotten a couple cracks at it before against Notre Dame and Clemson. This time around, he gets a stab at it against another ACSC opponent, one who, like the Cyclones, looked to be going farther than just the Pop Tarts Bowl until late in the season. Campbell has no reason to be focused on those past Camping World Bowl appearances, though, just locking in on defeating the Miami Hurricanes, who were knocked out of the ACC Championship in the final week of the season by Syracuse. Like us, Syracuse also has a potent passing game that ended up being Miami's Achilles heel. For those of us just watching the game, though, might as well grab a Pop-Tart for luck. Today is Friday, December 27th. I'm Matt Menson, and welcome to the Cornfield Sports Pod. All right, let's talk about this Pop Tarts Bowl game versus Miami here. We got a lot of stuff to go through here. Don't have a lot of time on my hands today, so I'm going to try to keep this episode relatively short. Hopefully that plays out for you guys too. But right now, both teams are going into this game. They are going to be looking for some generational success. As you well know, as Iowa State fans, Iowa State has never won 11 games in a season. This is our first season ever winning 10 games, so the natural progression, of course, is that 11 games hasn't happened. Miami has not won 11 games since 2003. And as we know, the college football landscape was very different back then. Miami was not in the ACC. They were in the Big East. The whole thing was a very different landscape. That was, when we're looking at, Miami and Ohio State and those teams just being dominant. So it's a different world, a different kind of Miami team. Super offense heavy. This Miami team actually kind of reminds me of like the Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray Oklahoma teams. But what causes this game to shake down really interesting here is that this matchup is a strength on strength matchup pretty much everywhere you look at it, with maybe one exception that I'll be talking about in a little bit here. But let's start off with the obvious point here. We all know what Miami's offense can do. That hasn't been a secret at any point in the entire season. We kind of known what to expect right from the get-go. And that's for good reason. Ward is one of the best passers in the country. Very few defenses have any kind of answer for slowing Cam Ward down. The lone exception to that being Georgia Tech, and that was kind of only a half-baked answer. Because Miami still scored 23 points in that game. And it was the only time that Miami's been held below 30 points. And I attribute that game to be more of a fluke than anything else. I don't see any particular reason to believe that Georgia Tech would really hold Miami that low again. But Cam Ward, he holds the Miami single-season records for both yards and pass touchdowns. He's got 4,123 yards and 36 touchdowns, which is pretty crazy. Those are some huge numbers. I'm looking at over 4,000 passing yards. It's just wild. That takes a lot of insanely high passing games to do. Miami's averaging over 360 pass yards a game. They absolutely cook through the air, and we know that their passing game is going to be at full strength, because while there was some talk before the game that leading receiver Xavier Restrepo might be out for that game, we now know that those rumors were not true. Xavier Restrepo is going to play for the Canes in this game, and Restrepo is a difficult matchup for anybody. And if the pass rush does not force Cam Ward to get the ball out quick, Restrepo will get open. You can only cover Xavier Restrepo for so long. He's a really, really good receiver. I would expect him to be drafted probably in the first couple rounds of the NFL draft. He is just a tough dude, and he is insanely talented. And thank goodness that Iowa State's pass defense is also our strength. So while Miami is passing for 360 plus yards a game, ISU's only giving up just barely over 160 pass yards a game. So Miami's average is over double what we're allowing. And that's over the course of the season. We are far and away the best pass defense that Miami has faced. So is it possible that maybe we can't even hold them more than Georgia Tech did? I guess it's possible. I wouldn't count on it, though. Miami's passing game is also the best one that the ISU secondary has had to deal with. There is not a passing game in the Big 12 that carries the same kind of potency that the Canes have. The Big 12 had some really, really good run games this year. We saw what UCF did with R.J. Harvey. We saw what Texas Tech did with Taj Brooks. We obviously saw very recently what Arizona State and Cam Scatterbu are doing. Kansas and Devin Neal have played some good games once they finally got things rolling later in the season, and they decided that they were going to beat us, BYU, and Colorado consecutively and throw the conference into absolute chaos. So Iowa State has had a lot of strength on weakness matchups where other teams' strengths are playing into our weakness with our rush defense against our weaker defensive front. That's not what we're actually dealing with necessarily in this game. Instead, they got to go through the teeth of our defense, with all of our D-backs back there. We got Jeremiah Cooper back there. We got John Tez Williams back there. We got guys that can cause some damage. Malik Verdon and Bo Freeler, they're guys that can cause trouble for Miami. The question is, how much does Miami change their game plan to try to avoid that and to attack our weakness? Do they go harder at the ground game than they otherwise would? And that's something we're not going to know until game day, until after kickoff. And then we'll find out what kind of adjustments they're making. But my biggest concern here is giving Ward too much time in the pocket. Because as good as our defensive secondary is, as good as our defensive backfield is, they can't hold together forever. And our defensive front has not been particularly solid all season, and we won't have Tyler and Yedem in this game. So that's only going to hurt the pass rush more. It's going to hurt the run defense more. And I discussed this earlier in the week on Miami Sports Talk earlier in the week with Danny Boy Kane. I'll put the link to that in the description. But we went pretty in-depth on that, rostering and things like that. But we need to find some strength here. We need a career day from somebody on our defensive front, because gone are the days of Jaquan Bailey and Ray Lima and Zach Peterson and Will McDonald and guys that made our defensive front really, really solid. We just don't have those guys right now. I mean, I love Dominique Orange. I love J.R. Singleton. I love Tyler and Yedem, but they're not that caliber. But the flip side to this discussion here is also that the pass game is the strength of the ISU offense and the Miami defense. So regardless of who's on which side of the ball, we're actually not going to see all that much difference in style of play, I don't think. Now, we do know that Iowa State offenses, kind of regardless of who the offensive coordinator has been, does have a tendency to want to be run first, even though we have better passing offense than running offense right now. That's what we've seen out of Mauser this year, and we've gotten more pass heavy as the year has gone on. But I still think that they're going to try to be pressing the issue with Abu Sama and Carson Hansen earlier on in the game, instead of immediately playing to our strengths with Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins, which is exactly what we should be doing. That's our claim to fame this year, is that we have two elite receivers instead of just one. We are the only team in the country with 2 receivers who are 1,000-plus yarders. Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins have both cracked it. And Miami does have some talent in their pass defense, but the question is, do they have enough to keep both receivers contained over the course of the game? Can they keep one receiver contained? Yeah, sure. I see no reason to believe they can't keep one receiver contained. But 2, that's 2,000-plus yard receivers is not something that Miami has had to deal with. They haven't had to deal with that caliber of a receiving room yet. And I think that Miami's going to try to commit a lot of resources to slowing those 2 guys down. And so I think the way that we should be countering that is that we should be relying heavily on other outlets for the pass. Like I said, Miami's going to be very concerned about keeping tight coverage on Nolan Higgins. So what do we do about that? Well, if they're going to divert extra resources to covering Nolan Higgins and keep them from carving him up, what that means is that it should create some openings for Gabe Burkle and Steve O'Klotz and, our running backs leaking out of the backfield. And while those might not necessarily be home run balls, we take what we can get. And if they're going to give us chunk yardage by those guys, let's do it. Because if we force the issue there, if we force Miami to stop giving us what they give us early on, because it's killing them, then it's going to open up the home run ball later on. And then, that's when we can get Noel flying down the field, or we can get, Higgins on that flag route or something, deep in or something, stop and goes. Yeah, the kind of stuff that those 2 receivers excel at. But this game will actually be the first ever matchup between the Cyclones and the Hurricanes. I thought the spread for this one was just crazy. It's only Miami minus 4.5. And the over-under is listed at 57.5. I think that they're expecting way more defense in this game than makes any shred of sense. The spread actually opened at Miami minus 1.5. And, people hammered the heck out of that. Money is still going very strongly for Miami. It's going about 2/3 for Miami right now, at minus 4.5. And that makes perfect sense to me. I don't think that we're going to be able to stop Miami's offense very much, because Cam Ward is just going to have all day in the backfield. So he's just going to be waiting for opportunities. If Cam Ward is patient at all, and he's a disciplined quarterback, he's got patience, he'll be able to beat us play after play after play. So I don't think there's going to be very many drives that we stop the Canes. If Iowa State wants to win this game, they're going to have to win it in a shootout. I don't think that the Cyclones are going to be able to do that. I don't expect our offense to be able to keep up in that kind of fight. My final score prediction has not changed since I was on Danny Boy Kane's show. My final score prediction is Miami 45, Iowa State 28. So that means Miami covers, and we hit the over. And we hit the over by a lot in my prediction. I think that an over-under at 57.5 is just patently ridiculous. We're talking about scoring, that's roughly 28 points per team, which just seems way too low. But we'll see how accurate my prediction is tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. The game will be on ABC. If you are actually able to make it down to Orlando for that one, I kind of envy you because it's cold in Iowa. The weather sucks. It's raining right now. And man, I would love to be in Orlando. It's warm there. They got palm trees. There's a football game there tomorrow. All kinds of good things. Speaking of good things, let's transition into men's basketball here. Because this men's basketball team might be the only team in the Big 12 that's chock-loaded with good things. But nonetheless, we are chock-loaded with good things. We ended our non-conference slate 1 point off from cracking 100 points against Morgan State. We defeated them 99-72, which means our margin of victory was actually 1 point less than our first conference opponent, and we'll get to talking about this in a second here. But here in this game against Morgan State, every single starter, plus Curtis Jones, so 6 players in total, scored in double digits. I love the versatility of this team. This is the kind of versatility that we just have not seen from the Cyclones in a very, very long time. I really think that if you want to go back that far, you gotta get to that Dustin Hogue, DeAndre Kane, Melvin Edgem, George Niang type of team to have that much, to have even a comparable amount of versatility. And I think this team has that team beat in terms of versatility. Again, 6 players scoring in double figures. Yes, it's against Morgan State. That's still not an easy thing to do. But that kind of versatility makes the Cyclones the force to be reckoned with. The force, not a force, the force to be reckoned with going into Big 12 play. This team has done everything that they possibly can do in the non-conference to separate themselves from Kansas, from Houston, from Cincinnati, from Baylor, from who else is even supposed to be up there all that high? From Arizona. Some of this, part of that's because the rest of the Big 12 is severely underperforming in conference play. We've talked about that some already on this show before. Arizona's pretty overrated to start the season. Kansas took on a couple losses. That loss against Creighton was not a good loss for them in particular. Houston's got a few losses. Arizona was, less than 500 not that long ago. They're borderline unwatchable at this point. It feel bad for the Arizona fans that had high expectations coming into what's supposed to be the best basketball league in the country, and the only team that's actually living up to that expectation right now is our Cyclones. So good on the Cyclones for that. But man, our conference strength of schedule got killed compared to other conferences. But as far as the versatility of this team goes, this is why it's so important. Every answer that a team has in order to keep one of our scorers down just means that another scorer takes over. And we have more good scorers than you can even have on the floor at once. So opposing defenses, they just get spread thin. And when you can only have, if they have to try to keep track of 5 scorers on the floor at once, they're not going to have 5 equally good defenders on the floor at once. That just doesn't happen. So the advantage that puts Iowa State in is at pretty much any given point, we've got a guy who can score against a guy who is probably going to struggle to defend him most of the time. And that allows Iowa State a lot of opportunities on the offensive end of the floor. It allows Iowa State to get open. It forces defenses into double teams that they don't want to make because that causes one of our guys to get open, that they have to allow it. Pretty much no matter what other teams' defenses do, it creates opportunities for us somewhere, and we're good at finding them. We got lots of guys on this team that are great at making reads. We all know what Taman Lipsey can do. He's good at making reads. Curtis Jones got some fantastic reads. Keyshawn Gilbert, he just does it all. And even Joshua Jefferson from that 4 spot. He racks up a lot of assists from that 4 spot, more than pretty much any other 4 you're going to see. And that's really good stuff to be working with here as we enter conference play. And now I want to get back to what I was talking about here with Morgan State. They put up a better fight against us in Hilton Coliseum than our next opponent did when we played them on a neutral site earlier this season. Opponent that we also scored exactly 99 points against. But Morgan State, we actually had a smaller margin of victory against Morgan State. The other team that I'm talking about, I'm sure you know exactly who they are because y'all watched the games in Maui. Y'all heard me talk about this after we played them. And you pay attention to Iowa State basketball, so you know who our first conference opponent is when we travel to Boulder and play the Buffs. There are going to be some expectations for Iowa State going into this game. And there should be. Now, I think we're going to make fun of ESPN's computers a little bit today because based on the ESPN computer model, the Cyclones have only an 81% chance to win. Only. I think they're short selling the Cyclones a little bit there. I think this game is essentially a gimme after we beat Colorado by 28 points on a neutral site. Spreads aren't yet available for this one, so I can't make fun of those yet. But the only thing that this Colorado team really has going for them is that earlier in the season they did beat UConn, who at the time was ranked number 2. And, originally that gave us a reason to believe, hey, this team might actually be worth their salt. They might actually be a tough team. Then we beat them by 28 points. And it also turned out that UConn is not remotely close to being as good as they were supposed to be. That was that weekend in Maui, they lost 3 consecutive games and got last place. Because UConn lost to Memphis before they lost to Colorado, and then after that they lost to Dayton. Turns out UConn isn't actually as good as advertised. And that win for Colorado, also not even remotely close to being as good as advertised. And we came back with a fury after that close win against Dayton and that loss against Auburn. We had something to prove and kind of took it out on the Buffs. But I think the focus that we need to have going into this game is attitude. And that's actually true for both teams here. Because there's kind of different options that each team can come in with this here. And how they approach this game is going to mentally is going to affect the result, because it always does. If Colorado is feeling intimidated or dejected after their last 40 minutes against us, well, that plays into our hands, because that means you're going to see less effort from them. You're going to see less hustle. It's going to open up opportunities to get steals, make fast break points, and run the score up, which of course is something I want to see. But the flip side of that coin is that Colorado could show up with something to prove. They might have a home crowd that shows up that wants revenge, and that's going to be tougher to deal with. Now, if the crowd is dejected too, if the fan base is dejected too, that's going to result in the team being dejected, because if the crowd doesn't show up, they can't push the Buffs into getting any kind of momentum. They can't influence the game if they don't show up. So if the crowd isn't there and the crowd isn't enthused and the crowd isn't energetic, that's going to result in the Buffs struggling as well. Now, we can't control the crowd at all. We got nothing to do with that. But the attitude that our team goes in will still make a difference in this game. The biggest thing that we need to do for this game is we have absolutely got to avoid coming into this game cocky because of how badly we beat the Buffs in Maui. Resting on our laurels is always a bad thing. There's nothing good that can come of that, because all it does is result in sloppy play. It creates opportunities for Colorado that they otherwise would not have. So what I want to see Iowa State do is come into this game with a job to finish. Last time we were 1 point short of triple digits. This time when we tangle with them, We need to drop 100 on them. We need to be locked in, and say, you know what? Yeah, this is Otzelberger's offense time now. Otzelberger has proven over the course of his previous 3 seasons in Ames that he is a master of defense, but now it's the offense's turn, and it's about time that we start lighting up the Big 12 on the scoreboard. A triple-digit game in conference play would say a lot about this team. And we know it's within the realm of possibility because of how close we were last time we played the Buffs. This is a good team. I have high expectations for this team, certainly higher than the rest of the Big 12 because the rest of the Big 12 is underperforming. And Iowa State seems to be carrying the weight of the conference on their back right now, and they're doing a good job. Also taking place on the basketball court here in the last week, though. Women's basketball. Well, it doesn't look pretty. It's really not a good look right now. The ladies, they lost at Oklahoma State 81-75. And Iowa State has now played 4 Power 5 teams. 3 of them were in the non-con. And of the 4 Power 5 teams that we have played, we have lost every single one of them. And in half of them, we got absolutely obliterated. It has not been pretty. And every single time we play an opponent that's worth their salt, it's not our talent level that gets exposed. We have talent. That's why we got the preseason ranking that we did in the first place. But poor strategy and lack of effort is killing the Cyclones. And it's like that old saying goes, right? Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. That's why we're losing these games. Talent is not working hard. I'm watching these games, and I'm seeing good effort from 3 players on our team. 3. It's Kelsey Jones, Ariana Jackson, and Sydney Harris. That's where I am seeing strong effort on both ends of the floor. Every minute that those players are on the floor, they do not slack off at any point. I cannot say that for any other player on our roster. And the other thing, too, is I was talking in the men's section here about how versatile that team is. The women's team is the exact opposite of versatile. I don't know if there is a word for it. Maybe stubborn. Stubborn is a good word. But all of the games that we win, we do on talent. We lack that versatility necessary to win big games because we don't win in multiple ways. And every good team wins in multiple ways. Every team that's worth their salt wins in multiple ways. But you go into every Iowa State women's game and you already know their strategy before warm-ups have even started. They play inside-out ball. They throw that ball to Audie Crooks as much as humanly possible. That's what they do. And that's why Audie gets so many points, because the ball always comes to her. And law of large numbers, it's going to get through a bunch if you throw it to her a bunch. But it's also going to get stolen a bunch. And that's what tends to happen, is we're not being efficient on offense. And so when the talent gap between teams isn't massive, adjustments can be made to cut off that inside pass and force turnovers. This is what the team out east did against us. This is what Oklahoma State did against us. This is what Drake nearly successfully did against us. And the strategy being employed here, that inside out, it's also particularly vulnerable against zone defense. Because what that zone defense does, and what we've been seeing a lot of, is that it baits feeds down to Audie Crooks. It baits them time and time again. We make bad reads on it. We fall for it over and over and over again. This is why we've seen Emily Ryan have a lot more turnovers than normal this year. We're taking the bait. And it's not just Emma that's doing that, it's everybody on the team. But they all turn into a lot of times fast breaks, not always fast breaks, but it turns into points off of turnovers for the other team a lot, and that's why we tend to lose points off turnovers battles in any game that is against a serious team. And so strategically, we have to change for the game on Wednesday when we host the Kansas Jayhawks. Because right now, we're too one-dimensional. We have got to start doing some side-to-side movement. That's the biggest thing that we need to focus on, is getting some side-to-side motion instead of just inside-out. Because right now, we need less predictability. We are so incredibly predictable. And that's why we have problems with turnovers. But we need more action off the ball. I want to see more screens. I want to see some pick and roll type stuff. Give me more basket cuts from other players. There's lots of different things our team can do. We just don't. And we should be. Because being one-dimensional is an effective way to lose games. If your goal is to lose games, be one-dimensional. You'll succeed. You'll succeed at failing. And the other thing, too, aside from just doing more different things, we got to do what we're already doing well. We need more hustle. I already talked about this, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the Oklahoma State game didn't do anything to change my mind on that issue. It was Sydney, AJ, and Kelsey that were hustling. And the team as a whole, though, just doesn't have hustle. They have slow reaction time. They don't get their hands up to contest shots. They don't slide over to cover open threes. It's a problem. They don't offer help down low. This is why our defense got absolutely demolished by UConn. The lack of hustle is exactly why UConn cracked 100 points against us. We're not putting in the effort necessary to get stops. And most of the stops, quote-unquote stops, that we get have more to do with the other team making mistakes or just missing their shots than us actually doing anything to force stops. Now, as for the Kansas team that we're going to have to be playing here, they have wins against Penn State, Pitt, and Auburn, which means they have 3 wins against Power 5 opponents. That's 3 more wins than we have. They have 2 losses against Power 5 opponents. Those are to the team out east and to Baylor. That means they have 2 less losses against P5 opponents than we have. They have a winning record against P5 opponents. We're winless against P5 opponents. Our best win was one that we barely survived against Drake at home. That is not a good resume for Iowa State. Iowa State has not given us any reason to believe that this women's team will do well this year. And I'm not really sure what the computers are seeing, because let's go back to making fun of the ESPN computers for a second. They've got Iowa State with a 78% chance to win this game. I cannot figure out why for the life of me we're favored in the first place, let alone at 78%. That's ridiculous. Until this team can begin to show some semblance of versatility, some ability to adjust to opponents, and a lot less stubbornness, I just don't see them beating any serious opponents at all. They're going to need a lot of luck if they want to do that, if they want to try to win games the way they're playing right now. As a preseason top 10 team, the haters said we didn't belong, and honestly, they were correct. Great call by the haters. Didn't have time to script up stuff for wrestling this week. We'll cover that next week. We'll give you an extra dose of it here before we get into conference duels. But until then, follow the Cornfield Sports Pod on Twitter at CSportsPod. You can find my co-host Blake. He's off today. He's down in Florida for the Camping World Bowl. But you can find him on Twitter at BlakeAttack1846. Of course, you can find me at SFMattISU. Tap the follow button on Spotify, plus button on Apple. Subscribe to us on Amazon, Castbox, or Good Pods if you use those. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Rumble. Hit the little bell for notifications. But for Blake Peterson, I'm Matt Menson, and this has been the Cornfield Sports Pod.